Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is Giant Size X-Men. I guess number one, since there only was a number one Giant Size X-Men. Hey, how's it going, everybody? So this is out of the X-Men number one, Uncanny X-Men number one omnibus from Marvel Comics. And one thing I wanted to do for a while here, because I've been kind of doing a lot of crowded-funded comics, a lot of manga, a lot of European stuff, and those are all great and well. But the very first video I ever did on my channel was the X-Men, and I kind of felt it's been a while since I kind of returned to them. It's been like an X-Men drought for a while, so I figured I'd go back and do a little bit of nostalgia and go back to really the first book I ever did on my channel. And the first story in that book, since technically when I did that review years ago, I kind of just went and did an overview of this book rather than the story itself, Giant Size X-Men, which I think is deserving of its own video. Anyway, let's get into this. So this was written by Len Wein, illustrated by Dave Cockrum. In this case, Len was also the editor for this one. And kind of the story of Giant Size X-Men was the X-Men were canceled in the 70s for kind of poor, sort of not performing very well back in those days, right? And they had been wanting to bring them back, but they were kind of worried about the series not really making good sales again if they brought them back. And Len Wein with Dave Cockrum and in the background Chris Claremont were kind of tasked to come up with a reboot to a degree. This is kind of a reboot before a reboot of the X-Men with a brand new team, and this became the basis for Giant Size X-Men. This is the introduction of the sort of modern X-Men team, as along with the tribute of the original X-Men team. So yeah, the original X-Men, which is Cyclops, Iceman, Marvel Girl, Angel, and Beast. And then the new team of Storm, Wolverine, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, and a few others here that kind of only stay for a little bit, right? Anyhow, turned out to be a huge success. Chris Claremont took over the regular X-Men series after this one. And then basically was the start of his incredible run on X-Men for Marvel Comics. Lasted like 13 or 14 years, I forget how many long. But technically it started with Len Wein and Dave Cockrum's book, even though Claremont was involved peripherally in the background, and because Len was going to hand off the main series to Claremont to continue with Dave from here on out. So there was definitely a lot of work that went into this back in the day, a lot of passion, ended up paying off splendidly for Marvel, and also kickstarted Claremont's career, as well as put Dave Cockrum on the map forever for these creations we had here. Anyway, let's get into this second Genesis right here. I've kind of babbled on for 3 minutes here. So the opening really goes through all of the character introductions right here. This is very classic. For those of you who kind of remember the New Mutants graphic novel by Chris Claremont, the opening for Giant Size X-Men, is probably inspired the New Mutants graphic novel because it's a very similar concept. We basically have individual short skits where characters get introduced, they run into some kind of problem or some kind of issue or some kind of event, and then they get approached by someone to basically become a mutant, right? So here you have Nightcrawler in Germany. He's being chased around by the townspeople, and get, of course, classic thought balloons, all the classic storytelling tricks of these days, right? Really got to know Nightcrawler very quickly in these first couple panels right here. So he gets jumped, and he's about to get vampired right here with a stake through his chest. Till Professor Xavier goes God mode right here. Offers to take him in to learn in his school for talented children, or gifted youngsters, I should say. And Nightcrawler, who probably doesn't want a stake through his chest, obliges to join Professor Xavier. Then we jump over to Canada, in Quebec, and here's Wolverine busting through the door saying, "What's up?" And he immediately gets up in Professor Xavier's face, who is trying to basically recruit him for his school as well. And then as soon as he, as soon as Xavier kind of hints at the ability to, for some or I should say, for the opportunity for some action and adventure, Wolverine immediately agrees to leave his position in the Canadian government and just bounce. He ends up pissing off this Canadian officer, but Wolverine's like, yeah, well, too bad. I don't care. This is still a free country, isn't it? Well, I guess technically not anymore in Canada. So they end up. So he ends up pissing off this Canadian officer and the Canadian government, which comes back to bite him in the butt later in this run, as we shall see that Chris Claremont kind of plays on. Ends up joining Xavier. We also get a really short 2-panel scene where he runs into Banshee, who is in Tennessee at the old Opry. Kind of an interesting place for Banshee to go. He wants to go see a country music special or something. So he ends up just joining him because it's like, oh, I might as well be on the straight and narrow, since Banshee, wasn't always a good guy all the time, especially in the older X-Men, right? And then we head off to Kenya, and this is the introduction of Storm, very first introduction, and she's half naked, like a lot of people in Africa, or at least what people thought people in Africa were at this time. And get kind of a cool example of her powers. This is a lot of Dave Cockrum basically imagining her capabilities as she flies across and creates a storm to provide rain for the crops right here. And then Xavier shows up and basically challenges her to use her powers for the good of the world, and convinces her to join this extraordinary team. We get a 1-panel shot of Xavier convincing, or actually a 2-panel shot of Xavier convincing Sunfire to join up, who was introduced earlier in the series in sort of the first part of the X-Men. I forget who created him, whether it was Stan Lee himself or oh man, I'm forgetting his name right now. It's like on the tip of my tongue. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so we go to Siberia, into Mother Russia, and here's Colossus working the fields, and he ends up transforming to stop a runaway trailer from running over his sister. And afterwards, Professor Xavier convinces him, reluctantly so, to join him in America and use his powers for the good of everyone, right? I always thought it was very fascinating that Colossus, especially a Russian, right, and a very proud Russian, right, not exactly someone who is I would say like against the state there in Russia as he's working a collective, right? That he would leave his homeland like that and just go to America willy-nilly right here. But it pushes the plot along, and it makes for an international team, right? So it's kind of cool. And then over in the West in Arizona, we run into John Proudstar, Thunderbird, who proceeds to wrestle a bison down. And then after some back and forth and some shit talking with Xavier, decides to go help him as well. Yeah, the theme of Native American characters clashing with Xavier gets repeated again for those of you who obviously are in the know with the New Mutants and Danny Moonstar. And then get to the second chapter. You guys can probably tell Giant Size X-Men was in fact giant. It was 64 pages, I think, which was massive for a comic book. Freaking huge ass comic book for the time, right? So definitely was a big chunk of story and a big book, and also sold very, very well too, which was a big success for Marvel in terms of kickstarting this new team. So we just kind of jump ahead, and Len Wein kind of like, I don't want to explain how everyone gets their costumes, so Mr. Fantastic just did it. You'll find out about that later. And the rest of the cast is like, well, I guess, cool, cool dig, so we'll just go with it. So Cyclops busts into the scene, and this is back in the day when Cyclops wasn't a bad guy. He was just kind of moody and brooding all the time. This was before Wolverine eventually kind of usurped that role as the brooding character in the team. And he kind of like quickly yells at them to get in here as he explains the situation. So the X-Men were kind of on a mission, and they were sent to an island to go find a mutant on that island. And suddenly they were ambushed. Cyclops didn't see, but he comes to after going unconscious for a while. And he's basically torn up, and his optic powers aren't even working right here. He's able to see properly. He ends up flying back against his will to Professor X, and his powers also restart once he shows up there. And he explains the situation that he was basically sent back against his will, and the rest of the X-Men are trapped on an island. So at this point, he explains why all these new mutants were brought together. And it's really to rescue the old X-Men. So it's basically a new group of mutants to rescue the old group of mutants. The new world rescuing the old world, right? And they all fly off except for Sunfire, because Sunfire's a dick. Until Sunfire flies back and decides he wants to join. Gets kind of shat on by Nightcrawler as he heads back. And the gang basically assaults the island together. And there's a lot of like learning lessons here, and it's kind of the classic X-Men theme of team dynamics, interrelationships between characters on the team. This is the early days where Colossus and Storm, this is the first time they're working with each other, so they're not exactly used to each other at all. Sunfire obviously is a dick, and Kurt, despite being a nice guy, obviously doesn't really appreciate it, so they're constantly talking shit with each other. Wolverine is with Banshee and immediately is not really into it either. Basically, all these guys don't really get along, and then Thunderbird doesn't really get along with anybody, particularly not Cyclops, who's very much a difficult character in this time in the X-Men. Generally not an easy character to get along with as the strict leader, right? So they get in, and everyone kind of has challenges, from like branches that attack them to flying rocks to crabs and birds and whatnot. They eventually all meet at the temple in the center. They break down the door, and they find the original X-Men are basically strapped with these vines that are sucking energy out of them. And when they come to, they basically tell Cyclops that you're a fool for having come back, because the mutant is the entire island. And that's when Krakoa, right? The island that walks like a man, right? So those of you who are in the know of the current series, Krakoa is like the island nation of mutant supremacy, bullshit that Jonathan Hickman and the rest are going on about with the current series. And this is the original appearance of Krakoa, which was originally basically an island monster that was a mutant, right? Anyway, they go at it, and all the X-Men go and fight this beast with little avail. A lot of really cool panels, by the way. The art here, like some of these panels by Dave Cockrum, are just amazing. I love this panel. This panel's fantastic. Especially if you consider the times, right? Look at how dynamic this is. Like this is the shit right here. Anyway, Professor Xavier ends up mind linking with Cyclops and telling him that he's going to attempt to start a mental battle with Krakoa to try to stun him. In the meantime, Storm flies up into the air to build up electricity, whereas on the ground, Lorna Dane is building up magnetic powers right here. And this is, the whole concept, by the way, that later gets led on to basically the conclusion of this makes zero sense, like from a science perspective, but it's really fucking cool. It's one of those things where, like, every time I read Giant Size X-Men, I kind of have to remember that, like, my first impression of how the ending of this story goes is kind of, like, that's kind of dumb, but at the same time, the way it was done within this book is so exciting and so cool, you kind of forget about it when you're reading it. Dude, look at these vertical panels, by the way. Like, look at this vertical panel. So there's Lorna Dane at the bottom with magnetic fields building up right here. And here's Storm right here with a lightning bolt. Oh, I freaking love it. I freaking love it, dude. This is like classic American comics. Like, the vertical panel right here is like straight up. To me, I have never seen manga do this, I would say, consistently. And I also have never seen European comics do this consistently. I think a lot of that has to do with the format. European comics are kind of large and wide, so the temptation is always for more wider panels or lots of panels. And in manga, the pages are really small, so vertical panels like this would get kind of lost in all of that. So they tend to only do very low panel counts or double page spreads and stuff like that, which is fine because the whole point of manga is the page is smaller, so they make more pages. But in American comics, they've always had the sort of tall and thin format, and so the vertical panel has always been kind of a mainstay of this format. When it's done right, it's really, really pretty, and this is like a perfect example of it right here. Oh, this is so cool. So anyway, they end up basically building enough power to essentially launch the island and Krakoa, the mutant, into space. It's like, what the fuck? And it reminds, dude, you know what's funny about this? Is this ending to Giant Size X-Men. It reminds me of the ending also, not to bring up a manga, but to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2. What is it? Battle Tendency? Which has a very similar like ending that makes zero sense, but it's kind of cool that you kind of don't give a shit and you just go with it, right? So, as ridiculous as the ending is, it's so cool, and the art by Dave Cockrum is so nice, and the drama and the build-up and excitement and just the feel of this book kind of makes you totally forgive it, and you're like, yeah, you know what, I don't care. Yeah, throw Krakoa into space. While you're at it, can you throw the current Krakoa into space? And the entire Marvel staff, or current year Marvel staff. Oh man. Anyway, so they end up basically Iceman ends up making them sort of an ice pod to survive the avalanche and typhoon that is created by the island getting tossed into the sun. And the Stratojet, which is precursor to the Blackbird that would get, ends up floating back up. And then they kind of remark, so what are we going to do with 13 X-Men? Which you find out in the next two issues very quickly what happens to that, right? But yeah, that's it, man. It's like freaking Giant Size X-Men. Actually, I think I misspoke. It's not 60, well, no, it's 68 big pages. Okay. So even though like in this, it's showing 46, so, or 11 to 46. So it's not really 68, it's, unless they're counting it, was there like a shitload of advertising in this? Maybe was there a shitload of advertising in this? I don't know. I don't own a copy of Giant Size X-Men #1, so I can't comment. If I did own a copy of Giant Size X-Men #1, you know I would totally put it on this table and beat it up in front of you on this camera. I'm joking. I wouldn't do that to Giant Size X-Men. But I would put it on camera. Anyway, guys, this was just kind of fun to go back to the sort of the origins of the channel right here. Kind of have a reminder of what I really enjoy about American comics and love about it, and what is worth kind of going over and remembering and cherishing. Right? These are kind of stories and comics that'll last or will last for as long as we can remember American comic culture. Right? This is great stuff right here. Anyhow, guys, that's it. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments on Giant Size X-Men #1, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.